What if the man everyone calls a loser, the one they mock in the hallways and whisper about behind his back, was the only one who could save them all? What if the single dad struggling to make ends meet was secretly more powerful than any of them could possibly imagine? Ethan Shaw mopped the gleaming linoleum floor of the hospital corridor, the rhythmic slosh of water in the bucket a familiar, monotonous soundtrack to his life. The smell of antiseptic was the air he breathed, the worn-out gray uniform a second skin. He kept his head down, his shoulders slightly stooped, a posture of invisibility he had perfected over the past 5 years. It was easier that way. It drew less attention. But attention always found him in the form of Derek Finch, the hospital's slick, overprivileged administrative manager. Derek rounded the corner, his expensive leather shoes clicking with arrogant purpose. He stopped directly in Ethan's path, forcing the janitor to halt his mop. "Shaw," Derek sneered, his lips curling around the name as if it tasted foul. "Still sloshing grime for a living. I saw your kid in the lobby earlier. He's starting to get that same, defeated look you have. Guess it runs in the family." Ethan's hand tightened on the mop handle, the wood groaning under the pressure. He said nothing. Engaging was a losing battle. His only priority was getting through his shift, picking up his 7-year-old son, Noah, from the after-school program, and making it back to their tiny apartment. Noah was his entire world, the bright, shining sun in his otherwise gray existence. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Derek chuckled, a nasty, grating sound. "Or are you just too tired from, failing at life?" A few nurses passed by, averting their eyes, their silence a form of complicity. One of them, Clara Reed, hesitated. She was new, and the casual cruelty of the hospital's social hierarchy still shocked her. She saw the flash of something in Ethan's eyes, not defeat, but a flicker of cold, hard steel that was gone as quickly as it appeared. She saw the set of his jaw, the rigid control in his posture. He wasn't defeated, he was contained. Derek, bored with the lack of reaction, finally moved on. "Try to make the floor actually clean this time," he called over his shoulder. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders. He finished the corridor and clocked out, the mockery echoing in his ears. He walked to the attached daycare, where Noah was waiting, his small face pressed against the glass. The moment Noah saw him, his expression exploded into pure joy. "Daddy!" He ran into Ethan's arms, wrapping his small limbs around his father's waist in a hug that healed every one of the day's tiny wounds. "Hey, buddy," Ethan murmured, kissing the top of his head. "How was school?" As they walked home, hand in hand, Noah's usual cheerful chatter was absent. He was quiet, his brow furrowed with a worry too big for his small face. "What is it, Noah?" Ethan asked, his voice gentle. "It's Mrs. Gable," Noah said, his voice trembling slightly. "She was crying today. She said the doctor gave her a new medicine, but it costs too much money. She said she doesn't know what she's going to do." Mrs. Gable was their elderly neighbor, a kind woman who had lived in their building for decades and always had a cookie for Noah. Her husband had passed away a year ago, and she was alone, living on a meager pension. Ethan's heart ached. He knew the crushing weight of medical bills. It was an infection that had taken his wife, an illness that had drained their savings before stealing her from them. He looked down at his son, whose eyes were filled with a profound, innocent empathy. "Don't you worry, Noah," Ethan said, his voice a low, firm promise. "We'll help her." "We always help." That night, Ethan sat at his small kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills. His paycheck barely covered their rent and food. There was nothing left. He thought about the past, about the life he'd left behind, a world of infinite resources, of power and influence. He could make one phone call and solve this. But that would mean opening a door he had bolted shut for Noah's sake. It would mean inviting the shadows back into their life. He couldn't do it. He would find another way. The next day, he came home from another grueling shift to a sight that shattered his heart and filled it with a fierce, burning pride. On the small patch of grass in front of their apartment building, Noah had set up a rickety card table. On it, arranged in perfect, neat rows, were his most prized possessions, his collection of hand-painted toy soldiers. Each one was a character in the elaborate stories he and Ethan would create together. There was Captain Courage, Sergeant Steadfast, and the rest of the brave platoon. A piece of cardboard was propped against the table leg, with a message written in a child's careful scrawl, "Toys for sale." For Mrs. Gable's medicine. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His son, his beautiful, kind-hearted boy, was willing to sacrifice his own treasures for a neighbor in need. He was about to go to him, to tell him he didn't have to do this, when a luxury car pulled up to the curb. Derek Finch stepped out, dressed in a tailored suit. He lived in the new luxury condo tower that loomed over their modest building. He saw Noah's little stand and a cruel, amused smile spread across his face. He pulled out his phone. Well, what do we have here?" Derek said loudly, ensuring the other residents could hear. "Little Shaw, selling his toys. Let me guess, Daddy can't even afford to keep the lights on." Noah looked up, his lip trembling, confused and scared by the man's mocking tone. Derek snapped a picture, the flash making Noah flinch. "This is priceless," Derek laughed. He typed furiously on his phone. "Just posted it." Caption: Local hospital janitor is such a failure, he has his kid begging on the street. Some people shouldn't be allowed to be parents. That ought to get some traction. Humiliation, hot and acidic, washed over Ethan. This wasn't about him anymore. Derek had crossed a line, bringing his son into his pathetic game. He strode forward, his movements suddenly devoid of their usual weariness. "Finch," Ethan said, his voice dangerously low. Derek turned, his smug expression faltering for a second at the cold fury in Ethan's eyes. But his arrogance quickly returned. "Ah, the men of the hour. Come to supervise your little beggar's business." Ethan ignored him. He knelt in front of Noah, his back to Derek. "You are the best person I know, Noah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you're doing is honorable. Don't ever let a man like him make you feel small." He stood up and faced Derek, his gaze so intense that Derek took an involuntary step back. "You will delete that post." Now, Derek scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "Or what? You'll mop me to death." But the threat wasn't in Ethan's words. It was in his stillness, in the absolute certainty in his eyes. It was a look that promised a world of consequences Derek couldn't begin to comprehend. Before the confrontation could escalate, a car door slammed. It was Clara. She lived a few blocks away and had been driving by when she saw the commotion. She had already seen the post, a friend had shared it, horrified. She marched over, her face a mask of indignation. "Derek, you are a loathsome bully," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "Take that picture down. You're tormenting a child," Derek just sneered. "Stay out of this, Reed. This is between me and the help." He got back in his car and sped off, laughing. Clara rushed to Ethan's side. "Are you okay?" "Is Noah?" she asked, her professional nurse's calm mixing with genuine concern. Ethan nodded, his jaw still tight. He looked at Clara, truly seeing her for the first time not as a co-worker, but as an ally. "Thank you," he said, the words carrying more weight than she could know. The next day, the post had gone viral locally. Ethan was met with stares and whispers at work. His supervisor pulled him aside, warning him about projecting a negative image of the hospital. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on him. Derek walked past him in the hall, smirking. "Famous yet, Shaw," he hissed. But the worst part was Noah. He didn't want to go to school. "Are they going to laugh at me?" he'd asked, his voice small. Ethan had reassured him, but the damage was done. Derek hadn't just attacked him, he'd stolen a piece of his son's innocence. That evening, Mrs. Gable had a bad turn. An ambulance was called. Clara, who had been checking on her after her shift, rode with her to the hospital. She found Ethan in the waiting room, his face pale with worry. Her doctor said she needs the new medication immediately, Clara told him, her voice hushed. "The pharmacy has it, but they won't release it without payment in full. It's over $2,000. Ethan felt the walls closing in. He had failed. All his quiet strength, all his hidden skills, were useless against a pharmacy bill. He had kept his son safe from the ghosts of his past, only to be defeated by the mundane cruelty of poverty. Just then, the hospital's intercom crackled to life. "Code Silver. Code Silver. Unidentified security breach in the West Wing. All personnel initiate lockdown procedures. Code Silver." An active threat. The waiting room devolved into panic. People screamed, running for cover. Hospital staff tried to direct the chaos, their faces tight with fear. Derek Finch burst out of an office, his face flushed. "Everyone stay calm," he shouted, but his voice was shrill with terror. He was supposed to be in charge of this wing's emergency protocol, but he was frozen, useless. Amid the pandemonium, Ethan Shaw changed. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a settling. The weary slump of his shoulders straightened into a ramrod-straight posture of command. The tired, defeated look in his eyes sharpened into a gaze of pure, analytical focus. He scanned the room, his mind processing angles, exits, and threats with terrifying speed. He was no longer a janitor. He was a weapon. He moved toward Clara, his steps silent and deliberate. "Get down, stay behind the pillar, and keep your head low," he said. His voice was different, calm, authoritative, and utterly confident. It was the voice of a man who had walked through hell and found it wanting. Clara, stunned by the transformation, did as she was told without question. Ethan then walked directly to the panicked security guard fumbling with his radio. "Give me that," Ethan said, not as a request, but as an order. The guard, mesmerized by his sheer presence, handed it over. Ethan pressed the transmit button. "This is Echo 7. I am assuming tactical command. All units, report status and location. Lock down all access points to the Sterling wing. I want thermal scans of the ventilation system." Now the radio crackled. A confused voice answered, "We don't have an Echo 7 on our roster." "Sir, you do now," Ethan replied, his voice leaving no room for argument. He turned to Derek, who was staring at him, his mouth agape. "Finch. Get the hospital director and the chief of police on a secure line. Tell them the threat is an internal breach, likely targeting the benefactor in the penthouse suite. And tell them to stay out of my way." Ethan moved through the lockdown hospital like a phantom. He used his janitor's keycard to access service corridors and maintenance tunnels, his knowledge of the building's hidden pathways now a formidable tactical advantage. Clara, watching from her safe position, saw him on a security monitor. He moved with an economy of motion she'd only seen in movies, a fluid, deadly grace that was utterly at odds with the men who mopped the floors. The threat was a team of corporate saboteurs who had bypassed the hospital's network to steal sensitive data from the hospital's primary benefactor, the reclusive billionaire philanthropist, Caspian Sterling, who was secretly on site for a private medical procedure and to finalize a massive donation. They were professionals, but they had never encountered anyone like Ethan. He didn't confront them with force. He corralled them. Using the building's own systems against them, he locked them into a single service junction, cutting off their escape. He appeared in the doorway, unarmed, a silhouette against the hallway light. "You have two options," Ethan said, his voice calm. "You can surrender to me, and I will ensure you are treated fairly. Or you can try to get past me, and I will dismantle you." Piece by piece, the three saboteurs, armed with sophisticated equipment, looked at the janitor and then at each other. One of them laughed and lunged forward. Ethan moved in a blur. A precise strike to the man's wrist made him drop his device. A second strike to a nerve cluster in his neck sent him collapsing to the floor, unconscious but unharmed. The other two froze, their eyes wide with terror. They had seen enough. They slowly raised their hands. Minutes later, the lockdown was lifted. Hospital security, led by a SWAT team that had just arrived, found the three intruders neatly zip-tied together in the service corridor. The hospital director and police chief were stammering, trying to understand what had happened. Derek Finch was pale, looking at Ethan as if he were a ghost. The doors to the penthouse suite hissed open. A team of elite private bodyguards emerged, followed by an older man with piercing blue eyes and an aura of immense power. It was Caspian Sterling. He ignored the assembled officials and walked directly to Ethan. "Shaw," Sterling said, his voice a low rumble. He placed a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I should have known. Wherever there's a mess, you're never far away." Usually with a mop, he turned to the stunned hospital director. "For those of you who are confused, this man, Ethan Shaw, is the only reason your hospital is still secure, your data is not on the dark web, and my life is not in danger. He is also the man who walked away from being the sole heir to my entire fortune 5 years ago to raise his son in peace." A collective gasp went through the corridor. Derek Finch looked like he was going to be physically sick. His world, built on a foundation of wealth and status, had just crumbled into dust. The man he had tormented, the loser he had publicly shamed, was heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. Sterling's gaze fell on Derek. "I was also made aware of a certain social media post," he said, his voice turning to ice. He held up his phone, showing the picture of Noah and his toy soldiers. "You mocked a child's selfless act of charity. You humiliated a man who has more honor and courage in his little finger than you have in your entire, pathetic body. You are fired. And my legal team will be in touch. We are funding a new anti-bullying initiative at this hospital, and your story will be our first case study." Derek swayed on his feet, his face ashen, and was escorted away by security. The crisis was over. The truth was out. Ethan stood there, the janitor's uniform suddenly looking like a disguise he was ready to shed. He saw Clara approaching, her eyes full of a million questions, but also a profound, dawning understanding. He saw his son, Noah, being brought to him by a kind nurse, his face full of relief. Noah ran into his arms. "Daddy, you were like Captain Courage." Ethan held him tight, burying his face in his son's hair. This was his treasure. This was his entire world. He looked up at Clara over Noah's head. The steel was gone from his eyes, replaced by a weary, gentle warmth. "So," Clara said softly, a small, wondrous smile on her face. "A secret billionaire commando, huh?" Ethan managed a real smile, the first she'd ever truly seen. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows. "Just a dad," he said. Later that day, Caspian Sterling's foundation paid for Mrs. Gable's medication and arranged for her to have comprehensive, lifelong medical care. Sterling also tracked down the person who had bought Noah's toy soldiers, a collector who had seen the viral post and been moved by the story, and bought them back for a sum that could have purchased a house. That evening, Ethan and Noah sat in their small apartment, the toy soldiers arranged back in their place of honor on the shelf. The world outside knew Ethan Shaw as the hero heir, the hidden power. But in here, he was just daddy. There was a soft knock on the door. It was Clara. She held a small bag of groceries. "I thought you guys might not have had time for dinner," she said, her expression a little shy. "Come in," Ethan said, his voice full of a warmth that had been locked away for too long. She stepped inside, her presence filling the small space with a new kind of light. She looked at him, at the quiet strength that was no longer hidden, at the devoted father who had endured so much for his son. She didn't see a billionaire or a soldier. She saw the men she had started to fall for long before she ever knew his secret, the men who helped his neighbors, who loved his son fiercely, and who had a hero's heart beating beneath a janitor's uniform. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. It felt right. It felt like coming home. They say you should never judge a book by its cover. But what happens when the cover is a worn-out uniform, and the pages within tell the story of a king who chose to be a father? Share this if you believe that the greatest strength is not the power you hold, but the kindness you show when no one is watching.